Hello once again, witchy people. Welcome back to the Covenstead. Another little chat from me, and today it's about the origins of the word bonfire. And obviously, we all like a good pyre, a good fire. But why bonfire? Where does that come from? So there are several different versions, and this is going to scatter around a bit because they all comes down to the same basic thing. But anyway, so some people claim that the word stems from the late 16th, mid 16th, late 16th century method of execution where you tie people to a stake and burn them, and these were known as bonfires. And the two words eventually joined to become bonfire. And that's not quite right to me. I think it could be, but not quite right. And it's a bit dark and a bit macabre. So let's go on to something else. So the earliest recorded mention of the actual word bonfire is listed as BaneFire, closest. And that was John Merck's Book of Festivals, circa 15th century. I think it was about 1483, 84, something like that. And this bonfire, the word was used to describe a communal fire in the celebration for St. John's Eve. And these fires were made apparently using clean bones rather than wood or kindling. No wood, clean bones and no wood. So Samuel Johnson, who's famous for his, obviously, dictionary, though a master of words and, I'm sure he's a very clever man, he boringly, and I think wrongly, claimed in 1755 that the origins of the word bonfire came from the French bon and the English fire. It doesn't make sense because in that time, in that etymology, you wouldn't have the English and the French mixing. Anyway, it's a long explanation. It doesn't make sense. So, although some people do think that bon from, good fire, I don't think that's true either. So, going into sort of more depth and some of the origins that I feel are right for my version of a bonfire, a bonefire. So, I know that the ancient Celts held like midsummer and Samhain festivals where fires were lit and animal bones burned in the fire to ward off evil spirits. Now, they're not the only ones. The ancient Greeks burnt both bones and the animal fat in the fire when an animal was sacrificed, leaving the meat for themselves. So the animal was sacrificed for the gods, and they'd use the fat and the bones in the fire as an offering to the gods. And the meat itself wasn't burnt, obviously, but it was used in the celebrations as sustenance and to help celebrate and honour the gods. Now, in folklore, you have bonefire, BANEFYRE. And in folklore, it was said that the smell of burning bones used in a fire would ward off dragons. Doesn't make sense though, does it? Dragons, fire breathing, burn people. No. So so obviously we know that fire is a purifying element. It represents a purifying element, and it can also represent life, and that it gives heat and warmth and light, but also death, because it changes things, and also fire is a destructive force. So fire was said to drive out evil spirits and feed the good spirits to aid the living. So in ancient times, and we are talking about sort of like way back, cattle they were a symbol that if you owned cattle, you were wealthy, and it was a status symbol. If they were a symbol of wealth and status. So to as a symbol for this, they were led through the smoke of a fire, a bonfire, and this would, make them sacred and protected and consecrated. So you consecrated the animal, and it was kind of like not to make it so that it was safe as such, but made it good to eat when it was sacrificed, when it was slaughtered at the end of the year. But really, I think passing the animal through the smoke was used as a fumigation, as to cleanse them of parasites. So it was actually, they had a reason for doing it other than sort of like the spiritual sort of meaning. It did have an actual material meaning to it, because the smoke got rid of the parasites, which obviously made the cattle healthy and is better for them. Now, if we go on to think about bones being used in a fire, as in BoneFire, the thought was, and the thought is now, that when bones, sort of like as you ate during the year, the bones were collected, because once you took the marrow out of the bones, and you didn't need them as much. You could use them for certain things, but you didn't need them that much. So you collect the bones, and they tend to pile up outside your house, your hovel, whatever, wherever you lived. So you collect all the bones. But there was a reason for this. So as you slaughtered your livestock throughout the year, you kept the bones, and part of that was kind of like as a reference that these animals, were giving you sustenance for living. It was an honour thing. You were honouring the animals and the gods that these animals represented to you, and the life that they'd sacrificed. So you'd keep the bones. And this comes from folklore in Lincolnshire, and sort of old legend in Lincolnshire. And I think it was recorded in 1552. It was actually written down that celebration fires were made in public streets using just bones of oxen and sheep that were collected through the years. So all the families would collect up the bones, and they would be burned. They would make fires out of these bones, bonfires, and like the whole village would gather round. Everyone in your community would gather round, and it was like because this sort of happens sort of like Halloween time, sort of salmon, and towards the darker days of the year, definitely towards the darker days of the year, it was kind of like used as a celebration and like before, and I said before about gathering together of people to swap communal news and just make sure that everyone's okay. So there is another use of where people think bonfire comes from, and that's banefire. And this could mean two things. Now, bane can mean bone. However, it can also mean a beacon from I think it's Welsh, ban, which can mean lofty, and fire, lofty fire, high fire, visible fire. It's a beacon. It also may refer to the Norwegian, I think it's barn, something like that, which also means beacon. So it can mean a beacon fire. According to the poems of Homer, so we're going back quite a long time now, and the writings of also Caesar, the Celts, when they were sort of like away from home and they were fighting away from home, they burned their dead on a pyre. And these, as the dead were named, they placed them on the fire. They were named, and people would gather around the fire, put the dead on the fire, or the bones of the dead, because obviously sometimes you weren't going to, but they'd burn their dead, even the bones, if it was just bones left. And they'd name each body as it was named on the fire, so that the smoke would take in the name, so it would be there, and they'd be all around, and it's almost like their spirits would envelop them. And then they would grieve for the person, but also honour the person, and they'd wail and scream and, you know, just to let know that it was wrong that this person had died, but that their spirit was going to live on and, you know, be healthy for them. So after all the wailing was done and the fire would start going out, they would then extinguish the rest of the fire with wine. So very much a ritual here. The remaining whitened bone, or ash bone, they were taken out and laid into a casket or an urn, which was usually gold coloured, ready to be sent home. So you could take the spirit of the dead back home, so they wouldn't be left in a foreign land or in an alien place. Going back to collecting the bones of slaughtered animals, especially cattle and sheep, when they were slaughtered late in the year. Now, the meat was salted to preserve it, but also quite often the meat was smoked to preserve it. And then also what was left in the ashes and the bones were ground down, and that was used as fertiliser. So the bones of the animals were then used again to help with the stock, and sometimes they also used to put it in chicken feed as well, to feed the fowl. But yeah, it was kind of like used to fertilise the crops and to help them grow. So the folklore in all of this comes down to very old practice, and it was still going on for a while, where you would sit around a bonfire, a beacon for the spirits to honour the dead, and you would talk about the people who you'd lost and the people who had died, and then you'd throw in offerings. Instead of bones, you'd throw in offerings. So the bones sort of like came into to be offerings. You throw in offerings into the fire to drive away the evil spirits, and not so much drive away the evil spirits, but promote the good spirits to come and help you to keep the evil spirits away. So it's kind of like a good luck thing. And I think, what was it? There was a programme that I was watching. The Haunting of Bly Manor. There we go. Haunting of Bly Manor, and the gardener in it says, we build a pile of old bones and burn away the shadows, because from here on in, the shadows get deeper, the nights get longer, and in the dark we have to hold on or hang on to each other. Which I thought was very good. So yeah, and obviously part of the offerings as well, when you used to burn offerings, it was rubbish. When people had died as well, you'd burn their belongings, and that was especially an old, and I know the word gypsy isn't like to be used anywhere, but Romany, okay, we'll call it Romany. An old Romany or Vada thing was to burn. When someone died, you burnt everything of theirs. But part of that was to get rid of rubbish, to get rid of the old as well. And offering these offerings, not just when you burnt people's things, but when they were dead and you tossed something in the fire to remember them. It was kind of to appease the spirits of the dead, not just to honour them, but to appease them if they maybe been wronged in some way, as well as to remember and honour them. I think now, as a witch, and how I sometimes use this sort of like the folklore and the information and the myth and everything with a bonfire, a bonefire. So I believe we can only carry so much emotionally and mentally. We can only carry so much. So now, instead of bones throwing in the fire, we can throw our words into the fire as an offering. So instead of tossing a bone, you throw a word, or you throw a phrase, or you throw your words to talk about someone or something, to represent the offering for those that we've lost, and to honour and remember them. Not just to drive away the ghosts or the memories that worry and fret us, but to honour and remember as well. So there you go. That is my little chat on bonfires. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back very soon. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, witchy people. Bye for now.